At dawn on August 25, 1944, the roads of France were already alive. Long before the front lines woke up, thousands of American trucks pushed through damaged roads, carrying the one thing Patton's armored forces needed more than anything else: fuel. Inside those convoys were gasoline drums, ammunition crates, and spare parts. Supplies that would decide whether the fastest-moving army in Europe could keep moving. German commanders watched the American advance with confidence. They believed the Americans had created a problem they could not overcome. Too many vehicles, too many miles, too much dependence on machines. But they had missed the real weapon. Behind every Sherman tank, every artillery piece, and every advancing soldier was a hidden supply chain, built to keep the battlefield alive. The Red Ball Express was about to prove that wars are not only won at the front. Sometimes, they are won on the road behind it. After the breakout from Normandy, the Allied armies faced a problem few commanders had expected. They were winning. But they were moving so quickly that their own supply lines began falling behind. Every mile Patton's forces pushed deeper into, France created another challenge. Tanks needed fuel, artillery needed ammunition, trucks needed spare parts, soldiers needed food and equipment. The battlefield was no longer only about defeating the enemy in front of them. It was about keeping the entire machine alive. German military thinking had always valued speed and operational movement. Their commanders understood that a fast offensive could overwhelm an opponent before they had time to react. But they believed American forces would eventually suffer from their greatest weakness: distance. They expected the American advance to slow when supplies became impossible to deliver. What they underestimated was the scale behind the American war machine. Factories thousands of miles away, transportation networks, and thousands of trucks created a system designed not just to fight, but to keep fighting. The Germans expected the tanks to run out. They did not expect the trucks to keep coming, but behind every truck was a driver, facing conditions almost as difficult as the battlefield itself. The Red Ball Express was not powered by generals, famous commanders, or the crews of legendary tanks. It was powered by thousands of ordinary soldiers sitting behind the wheel of heavy trucks, carrying the supplies that kept the front moving. Many of these drivers were African-American servicemen serving in segregated units during World War II, CIT. They were given a mission that demanded patience, precision, and endurance. Move supplies through a battlefield, where every delay could affect the entire offensive. The trucks were not glamorous machines. They were not designed to fight enemy tanks or capture territory. Their purpose was simple: deliver what the army needed before it ran out. But simple did not mean easy. Drivers traveled damaged roads filled with destroyed vehicles, narrow bridges, traffic jams, and the constant possibility of enemy attack. A mechanical failure was more than an inconvenience. A broken truck could block a route. A missed turn could send a convoy miles away from where it needed to be. Every minute mattered because Patton's forces were burning through fuel at a staggering rate. These soldiers had to become more than drivers. They became navigators, mechanics, and problem solvers under pressure. They learned the roads by memory. They kept engines alive when parts were limited. They drove through darkness because the front line could not wait. Their battlefield was not a field of trenches or tanks. Their battlefield was the road itself. They carried the war forward, but most never appeared in battlefield photographs. Their names were rarely written in official victory reports. Yet, without them, the victories ahead could have stopped before they ever happened, and soon they would face the ultimate test: a supply mission where speed mattered more than comfort, and failure was not an option. The solution was not another weapon. It was a road. To keep Patton's forces moving, the Allies created a dedicated supply system unlike anything many soldiers had seen before. The Red Ball Express turned ordinary highways into a military lifeline, where trucks had priority and every vehicle had one purpose: deliver supplies as fast as possible. The routes were carefully controlled. Convoys moved forward carrying fuel, ammunition, food, and spare parts. Then, once unloaded, Drivers returned to collect more supplies and repeat the journey. There was no pause. The system had to keep flowing. Many trucks moved through the night, sometimes with headlights covered or reduced to avoid drawing attention from enemy aircraft. Drivers pushed through darkness, exhaustion, and unfamiliar roads because the army ahead depended on every shipment arriving on time. Sight. The scale was enormous. The operation involved thousands of vehicles, often cited around 12,000 trucks, moving massive quantities of supplies every day to support the advancing Allied armies. Sight. But the real challenge was not simply moving trucks. It was maintaining a rhythm. One truck arriving late could affect another convoy. One damaged bridge could create a traffic disaster. One shortage at the wrong moment could slow an entire armored advance. The Red Ball Express became a machine of movement, not a tank, not an aircraft, a machine built from engines, roads, fuel, and human determination. Every mile forward created a bigger problem, and every problem needed another truck. But the enemy was watching. As the convoys became essential to the Allied advance, German forces began looking for ways to break the supply chain. The road itself was becoming a battlefield. Part E. The Red Ball Express had solved one problem. Now it faced another. The trucks were moving, but every mile they traveled deeper into France increased the danger. The roads that carried the Allied advance were also exposed routes that the enemy could target. German aircraft searched for supply columns. Artillery threatened key crossings. Damaged bridges and destroyed roads forced drivers into slower, unpredictable routes. The weather added another obstacle, turning roads into mud and slowing heavily loaded vehicles. These trucks were never built to fight. They carried no heavy armor. They were not protected like tanks. Their greatest defense was movement. Keep going. Keep delivering. Keep the front alive. The drivers learned that the battlefield was not always where the fighting happened. Sometimes it was a narrow road filled with broken vehicles, limited visibility, and impossible deadlines. A convoy stuck behind a destroyed bridge was not just a traffic problem. It was a threat to every unit waiting ahead. Every gallon of fuel required planning. Every crate of ammunition required coordination. Every working engine required maintenance. The greatest enemy was not always the enemy. Sometimes it was distance itself. The farther Patton advanced, the more supplies his army consumed. The faster the tanks moved, the faster the trucks had to move behind them. The convoy could not stop. Stopping meant the tanks ahead stopped too. But then something changed. The Red Ball Express was no longer just a temporary solution. It was becoming proof that American logistics could keep pace with modern warfare. And that realization would change the entire calculation of the campaign. The Red Ball Express revealed something the battlefield often hides. The outcome of a campaign is not always decided by the weapon in front of the enemy. Sometimes it is decided by everything that allows that weapon to keep moving. German forces had proven themselves capable in many areas. Their commanders understood armored warfare, rapid movement, and battlefield coordination. But as the war continued, another problem became impossible to ignore: keeping those forces supplied. Fuel shortages, damaged equipment, and limited replacement capacity placed increasing pressure on German operations. Sight. America's advantage was not only the number of tanks, trucks, or aircraft it could produce. It was the system behind them. Factories replaced losses. Mechanics repaired vehicles. Supply units moved fuel and ammunition forward. Thousands of workers and soldiers formed a network that turned industrial power into battlefield momentum. The Red Ball Express was the visible part of that invisible machine. It showed that speed was not just about how fast a tank could travel. It was about whether the entire chain behind that tank could survive the journey. A Sherman tank could advance only as far as its fuel supply allowed. An artillery unit could fire only as long as ammunition arrived. An army could attack only as long as someone kept the system alive. The tanks did not win because they had more fuel. They won because someone kept delivering it. By September, this temporary experiment had already changed the pace of the campaign. The road behind the front line had become one of the most important battlefields in Europe. By the end of August 1944, Patton's Third Army was moving at a pace that surprised even many Allied planners. But behind every advance was a question that could not be ignored. How long could the army continue moving? The Red Ball Express became the answer. It was never a perfect system. Trucks broke down. Roads became overcrowded. Fuel shortages still created difficult decisions. But the operation achieved something critical. It bought time. And in war, time could be the difference between momentum and collapse. The convoys continued pushing supplies forward so armored units could keep advancing. Fuel reached tanks. Ammunition reached artillery crews. Replacement parts reached mechanics working behind the lines. The battlefield was no longer only about the soldiers pulling triggers or commanders giving orders. It was also about calculations. How much fuel remained? How many miles could a truck travel? Which road was still open? Which vehicle could be repaired before the next convoy arrived? Sight. Thousands of trucks and thousands of drivers created a moving supply network that stretched across France. A temporary operation built under pressure had become a major factor in maintaining the Allied advance. The most remarkable part was how quickly it was organized. The Red Ball Express was created because the army had moved faster than expected. The solution had to appear almost immediately, and it did. The forgotten convoy behind the famous advance may have been the reason the advance continued. History often remembers the tanks crossing the battlefield. It remembers the generals planning the attacks. But behind those victories were people who spent endless hours keeping the machines alive. The trucks moved because the drivers refused to stop, and the army advanced because the road behind it never went silent. After the war, the trucks disappeared, but the lesson remained. Part H. After the war, the Red Ball Express slowly disappeared from memory. The trucks were parked. The routes became ordinary roads again. The soldiers who had spent endless hours driving through France returned to civilian life. But the lesson they left behind was much bigger than the operation itself. The Red Ball Express proved that logistics was not simply support, work behind the battlefield. It was strategy. A powerful army was not only measured by the weapons it possessed, but by its ability to keep those weapons operating under pressure. The operation showed the importance of teamwork, engineering, planning, and endurance. Thousands of small actions. A repaired engine, a delivered fuel can, a driver reaching the next checkpoint, combined into something much larger. Skill mattered. Experience mattered. But organization created an advantage that individual brilliance alone could not replace. The Germans had studied movement and tactics. The Americans showed that movement depended on something deeper, a system capable of sustaining it. A tank without fuel was just steel. An aircraft without maintenance was just machinery. An army without supplies was only a force waiting to stop. The battlefield remembers generals, battles, and famous machines. But history also depends on the people who keep those machines running. Victory was not only created at the front line, sometimes it was carried there. And that is why the Red Ball Express remains one of WWII's most overlooked stories. History remembers the explosions. It remembers the battles, the generals, and the moments when the world seemed to change in a single day. But it often forgets the engines that made those moments possible. The Red Ball Express was not a story about one person, one weapon, or one dramatic battle. It was a story about thousands of people performing a difficult task that few would notice until it stopped. The drivers, mechanics, planners, and support crews behind the front line proved that victory depended on more than courage in combat. It depended on preparation. It depended on discipline. It depended on people who continued working when the conditions became impossible. The next time you see a famous WWII advance on a map, remember to look beyond the arrows moving forward. Ask what carried those forces there. Ask who kept them moving, because some of the most important battles of history were fought far away from the front line. If you enjoyed uncovering this forgotten chapter of WWII, share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from? And what overlooked WWII story should we explore next? Because history is not only made by those who are remembered. Sometimes it is made by those who kept everything moving.